the councillors. I wonder whether or not he might be asked to comment on that, bearing in mind that we see countless examples of local authorities around the country reporting considerable financial stress at the moment, and bearing in mind that when we come to the budget, I don't think we ever talk about savings. Not once do I remember have any controversial saving that council's ever made. All we've ever done is carry on regardless. I wonder if the director might comment on that for us.
I can. It depends, of course, who you are comparing to. So many of those in the headlines have social services and are unitaries or counties, and they have huge headaches and expenditure difficulties because the cost of adult social care and child social care is enormous. And we are, I think, very lucky that we do not have those commitments to make, because otherwise we would be in significant financial difficulty too. Are we well resourced? We have a good level of reserves that's in excess of our minimum reserve requirement, and we have a relatively balanced budget for this year and probably for next year as well. Further ahead, it's uncertain. So the cost of inflation, if that stays at 8, 9, 10%, is going to significantly outstrip our ability to have income from, for example, investment income, which will perhaps top out at 4%, just over 4%. So that gap will automatically grow. So we are going to be in for a difficult period where we will either have to fund it through using some of those reserves, or we need to be spending those reserves that's going to generate more income than 4.5%.
If I could just come back on that one point about the question of reserves. We did speak about this at the last meeting, I believe. Regrettably, it's not in the minutes. I wonder if you could just confirm for the record what our current reserves are, and what you think, if it's still the thought, because I remember your predecessor talked about £6 million being an appropriate level.
That is, so our minimum level of reserves is 6 million, and we have approximately 19 million of general fund reserves. 19. So we're 3 times over the minimum. So for want of a better phrase, if any homeowners listening to this, if they had reserves 3 times their normal sort of mortgage allowance, they're doing rather well. Is that right? Yes. Yeah, what I would say to counter that, of course, is that we have significant expenditure commitments coming our way, and we know of those, don't we? So that if we want to do something with the capital, if we want to do something with our leisure centres to improve their carbon and environmental positions, yeah. If we want to replace the vehicles away from HVO, and we're refurbishing them because we hope that the prices of hydrogen or electric will fall. But we still have maybe £40 million worth of expenditure to spend this decade. So actually, when you compare 40 million against 19, we are still significantly short of money.
A number of those expenditures are, of course, discretionary and not statutory. That's the important matter. Sorry? That's the important matter. Yeah. Could I just ask the director if he could just explain to me, perhaps I'm a little slow on this, I'm not quite sure. It's the revenue budget, 22-23, page 23. If we look at museums, and forgive me if I've got this wrong, please help me on this one, Director. We've got a spend of £94,000 for the first 6 months. We've got an annual budget of 226, so we're just below 50%. Yep. We've got an income of 11,000 for the first half year, is that right? Yep. And we're anticipating a total income of 46,000, is that right?
That's not the forecast, that's the budget that we set.
Sorry, that's 46. That's the budget we've got, whatever you like to call it. Okay. So we're expecting to spend 226,000, yes? And receive 46. Is that right? So the net spend is 83. Does that balance? Have I read it wrong?
Is that our net spend at the moment, do you mean? Or is that our net spend?
The net spend is 83,000. Is that the subsidy for the year, the loss we're making on the museums?
So that's our spend of 94 less our income of 11. So 94 take away 11 is 83.
Oh, see, so in the full, you're not showing the full year there, you're just showing the 6 months.
The net spend at this point in
Yeah,
time,
okay,
yes.
brilliant.
And then, yes, and then, sorry,
Okay.
the forecast is then what we think that total will be at the end of the year.
Okay, sorry. So it would seem next door to the income budget, which is for the full year, but anyway, annual budgets, okay. So roughly speaking, we're anticipating a loss on the museums of about 166,000, 170,000. Is that right?
So it will be 226 take away 46. So 180 is that?
180,000, okay. You'll remember that we spoke last time when we met. We were puzzled, or a number of my colleagues were puzzled by the number of attendances at the museum being so considerably changed from the previous reports. We're now talking about 4,500, I think, we had in the second quarter, which was roughly the same as the first quarter. So we're talking about 9,000. So probably we're looking at 20,000 in a full year visiting the museums on that basis. We haven't got, and I think as a scrutiny committee, by the way, I think that we should be asked or we should be seeking an explanation of why these figures have so dramatically changed. They've dropped from something like 90,000 to 20,000. So they need some explanation. But what the real point here is that we're looking at a revenue loss of £180,000 for 20,000 people visiting our museum. So for every one person that goes through the doors, we lose £9. Now, this is why we need to have the cabinet member here, is because I just wondered what this council feels as an acceptable loss per visitor that we have at the museum. Is it £10? Is it £20? How far do we go? When do we start looking at the efficiencies of the museum in order to decide what will be an acceptable level? Now, Councillor Circus expressed some or inferred some concern about our financial well-being. Then this comes back on how long can we continue to lose £9 for every person who goes into the museum? Is this the right way that we should be going? And I think this, as an overview and scrutiny committee, is some subject that we ought to be looking at.
Thank you, Councillor Jupp. Certainly try and bring that to a future meeting, if not the next one, the one after that. I do wonder whether the attendances before reflected the Tourist Information Centre in the museum and whether that's clouded the figures in the past, but that's just a guess rather than anything else.
Well, if you looked at the figures as I did this afternoon for quarter two, for the years, I think 17, 18, 19, 19, 20, they're all indicating something considerably excess. I think they were looking at about 20, 25,000 people going in there instead of 4,500. There was something hugely wrong with the way in which we based our financial calculations on the museum. And I think we, as a scrutiny committee, we should be appraised of what those reasons were. And can I ask that these minutes or something that the cabinet member for finance be asked to report on that by the time we next meet? Because I'm going to be boring you with the same figures again next time, because we'll have the quarter three figures and they're showing 4,500 and we've lost another tens of thousands of pounds.
Was it the clerk writing copious notes there? And that will be in the minutes and it will be asked of the cabinet member and possibly also the cabinet member for leisure, because he has responsibility for the museum, I believe.
Thank you.
Can I just pick up on something there? So I did send around a summary response on the 29th of September, following our last
if I
meeting
haven't picked it up, sorry.
on the museum.
Is that reflected in, because if you look at these figures here, there's a very interesting explanation about the figures. But we're not, what is it now? You're saying, I've forgotten it. Sorry, looking at the figures. Can't see it now. Sorry, can't see it. Anyway, we've done that. Can I just ask another couple of questions, if I may, Chairman? I think probably the director won't be able to answer this, but it would have been nice. That's why if we had the cabinet member here. I was looking at Billingshurst, which is my ward, and the capital expenditure, which has still not yet been made with regard to creating a number of extra car parking spaces. A place called 52/54 High Street, which this council bought about 4 or 5 years ago. This work to create these spaces has been outstanding for years. And I was questioned about it at a parish meeting only last month. And I found it very embarrassing to say that I didn't know when this was going to happen. I now look at this information on here. It says £165,000, this is page 21, for Billingshurst car park until a decision is made. Has this council made a decision or not? I thought it had. I reported that years ago. I mean, I don't know which officer is responsible for this, but is this no longer happening? You don't know either. I don't ask you. I'm posing the question. You know, we're sitting here in a vacuum without a cabinet member. You know, it's an echo going around the room. The cabinet member may be listening in. I don't know.
Would you like me to
to
try and respond? I don't know the detail on
No.
that, but it's exactly the sort of question that in advance I could have arranged to have the relevant people in the room to answer that question for you. So it would be very, very helpful to submit your questions in advance, and I can get in the right person to sit here and explain it to you. Or in fact, you don't have to wait until an overview and scrutiny meeting. You can come and ask me, and I can direct you to that person at any time of the year.
You as director, you will have a handle on all these things, and probably on your machine if you could. Anyway, could I just ask another question with regard to Rookwood? If we have a look at page 25, and again, it's not a question I think that the director may be able to answer. 25, that may well be. But Rookwood Golf Club, completion of golf study, prepare a plan for further consultation 2023. Do we know when this golf study is going to be completed and when it will be reported to council? We don't know that.
I don't,
you don't know
I
that.
can find out.
Yep, okay, right here. Again, if we'd had the cabinet member here, Chairman, we might be able to answer all these questions. Probably that takes me for the moment. I may come back later on after another question, but after reading my papers this afternoon, I apologise to the director for not doing beforehand, but I have a lot of papers to read.
Thank you, Councillor Jump. Any other members have questions on this item? Better get it in quick.
Yeah, can I just ask, sorry, you're going to go, John? No. Can I just ask a question? We have a cabinet meeting, I think, later on this week, where the medium-term financial statement or strategy is to be discussed. Was it thought that that paper should have been considered by this committee? It has done in previous years, but it's not on the agenda tonight.
I honestly don't remember whether we discussed it at the equivalent meeting last year or not. We certainly will be discussing the budget and the medium-term financial strategy at the next meeting before it goes to Cabinet for ratification.
My understanding is it goes to the Cabinet on Thursday, is that right? Medium-term financial statement. Do you have a look on the forward plan?
Oh, yes, it is. No,
Yeah.
Yes. Is that not, I don't think we actually discussed it this time last year, I'm afraid, but we have done in previous years, and I do know other councils do that. before it goes to Cabinet? I mean, I would have welcomed the opportunity to have had a discussion on it, Chairman, but especially with the Cabinet member, even if only it was done by smoke signals. Zoom call.
Thank you, Chairman. I think in relation to the financial health of this council, clearly we're in a much better position than the county council because of the statutory responsibilities they have. That is the way of the world. However, I do think there's pressure on the discretionary spend that we have, and in fact, Councillor Jupp effectively just pointed out the museum as being vulnerable to it by alluding to its loss-making per capita position. So I don't think it's accurate to say that we don't make cuts. For example, we had effectively we cut the events in Horsham by removing the position of the events organizer, or he was reallocated to other services, and that in effect ended that service. It didn't get publicity, but it did end. And I do think pressure has been on discretionary services for some time, and indeed the sale of Brookwood was often justified on the grounds that it would preserve the capital, preserve the museum, etc., etc. That was a point made many times. So I don't think it's fair to say, although we're certainly hugely better off than the county council, there are pressures, and it's on the discretionary services, it's on the nice to have. Yes, we can keep up the statutory stuff, but I would definitely be concerned for pressures on all the nice to have services in the future, and we'll see how it pans out financially. Thank you.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. All I would say is that the Finance PDAG, certainly some questions were raised about discretionary spending and how the emphasis on the MTFS was all about increasing costs and increasing fees and increasing revenue, but nothing was raised about reducing costs and looking at the cost side. And the questions were raised at the PDAG, not about the museum, but about other matters, but certainly looking at cost reduction and trimming back on expenses where we could. So that question has been partly raised.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Serkis, then Councillor Skip.
I was just going to endorse what Councillor Jupp said about the importance of these things being considered at an earlier stage when we've got some reasonable chance of influencing what is being proposed. I mean, when I was a county councillor, I didn't agree with everything that in terms of the way the county council operated, but from my experience of serving on one of the select committees at county, and the select committees are basically scrutiny committees, I remember we would routinely consider these sort of issues, and at every meeting in which we considered them, the senior officer would be there, the cabinet member would be there, and the deputy cabinet member would be there. So there was a real chance of asking questions at an earlier stage when things weren't set in concrete, and to ask not just the senior officer, but the cabinet member and deputy cabinet member. And I think this is probably a procedure here that's slipped, because and I don't know whether Paul can recollect, but it seems to me this is what can happen. So if you don't keep a handle on these sort of things, and I think we ought to express an opinion, which is that we should see these things at an early stage, and certainly not a couple of days before cabinet. And what's more, when we are considering important issues, we should automatically expect the cabinet member to appear.
Thank you, Councillor Serkis. I'll just make a note of that. I think I will probably write to the leader to express this committee's view that cabinet members should be here, and I'll also be asking certainly the cabinet member for finance to be at the next meeting.
Yes, thank you very much. Sadly, I'm not going to look at figures and all the rest of it, but and I totally agree with what Councillor Serkis has been saying. This committee for a long time has not been taken seriously, in my view, by the cabinet and by other members of this council, because scrutiny, as I've always said, and said it so many times, I don't think I say it anymore, is here to actually act as a critical friend, but actually to be able to review what is going on and what are the proposals that are coming to council. We can't do that on the time scale that we have. And it's absolutely right. 2 days, 3 days before a cabinet member meeting is not right at all. Now, sadly, this all started when I think the proposal in the first overview and scrutiny committee was made right at the beginning of this term, that we reduce the number of meetings. Now, I can understand reducing the number of meetings, but actually there are important issues that arise between our meetings that we have, which should be debated. And I think that we have been downgraded in this term. And I think the overview and scrutiny should be taken with far more seriousness, particularly by the cabinet. So I agree with what's been said, but I would say that we need to be far more up the agenda, or up their agenda, and taken very seriously. I didn't bring the medical term in.
Thank you, Councillor Skip. I think clearly that that we need to be looking at how this committee is programmed, certainly for the next next council term, and maybe look at things somewhat differently as they are today. Councillor Fletcher.
Really, just to follow on from the theme, is this not an area where we ought to be requesting, not just requesting that cabinet members attend, but requesting some officer support in programming the agenda? That quite a lot of this could be dealt with by actually having a sort of almost a tick sheet list of which items that are going to cabinet or going to council need to be.
Sorry.
Councillor James Wright, he's one of the local councillors. Someone I've been working with together with West Sussex County Council.
Apologies.
Yeah.
Press one button, sorry.
So, yeah, I mean, these are there's a sort of there's a mechanism in play as to which things could be considered for approval, and it seems to me that this might be something where officers could give us some valuable assistance into getting a system going, and if that's difficult, that perhaps we could ask them to review best practice from other councils and the guidance that's produced.
Would you like me to come back on that as some observations?
Yes.
Obviously, there is a programme of works that you have as an agenda item, and you are also furnished with the forward plan every month. So you are aware of what is coming forward over the next few meetings for Cabinet and Council too. The chairman of this committee meets with the leader prior to the agenda being sort of finalised, as it were. And of course, it is for you as a group to request the attendance of a cabinet member for an item. And I'm sure if the cabinet member was asked, he would come along to it. So you just need to be, I suppose, clear with exactly what it is that you want, and we can facilitate that.
Councillor Clark.
Yeah, the reason why I picked my wrong button was because I was on another thing. Basically, the cabinet members would attend if asked to attend. in the particular case we're talking, they weren't asked to, he wasn't asked to attend.
You're right, thank you.
Sure, is quite rightly suggesting is that it shouldn't be a case of asking them to attend. The procedures should require cabinet members to appear on these issues automatically as part of the procedure by which issues are discussed and scrutinised. And I think that's the point we need to, not that, because otherwise what will happen is you'll be passed off with a comment saying, oh, cabinet members are very happy to appear if they're asked. What we're saying is the procedures should fit them in automatically. The procedures should, so there isn't a question of asking, it's their duty to be part of the process of scrutiny.
Councillor Clark.
If I could counter that, when I was on this committee before, which was some time ago, that was not the process in place. What the process in place at the time was, is that cabinet members were appointed to come, use appointed is not quite what I meant. But basically, individual cabinet members came every meeting. They were given questions. So if the meeting was on a Tuesday, let's say, they were asked, questions were provided by the Thursday, so the officers and cabinet members could prepare answers to the committee. They would come and answer to questions at the overview and scrutiny at the time. But it was built into the system a bit like Ruth was proposing, but not quite in the way I suspect that Philip meant and that others have said. But certainly in my previous role on this committee, yes, a cabinet member came every time, but it was, what's the term, Buggins' turn or whatever it is. So a cabinet member would come, one at a time, but it didn't stop a second cabinet member coming if overview and scrutiny had a precise question or a precise item to do at that time, if you see what I'm trying to say. I'm explaining it badly, but I hope you got the gist of what I'm saying.
I think we got the gist there, Councillor Clark, and I think it sounds as though the cabinet member for finance and possibly the leader would be required fairly often, and then the others if we've got a specific point on the agenda. But let's try and work towards that. Councillor Jupp.
So on this question of attendance, I think memories may vary, as they say. I think there's a popular phrase for that. What you probably will know that I've bored everybody stiff about this particular aspect for many years. Can I just ask a question, of the director? And again, forgive me, I haven't given you notice of it, but I'd be interested in your answer. We read of other local authorities having to pare back their leisure centres, or their services, their hours of opening and what have you, because of the increase in energy costs. I'm not quite sure what the district council is called over at Rye, but I see that they shut their swimming pool. And there were stories that one of the local authorities along the south coast here in West Sussex was considering the implications of the heating bills for their swimming pools. We have a number of swimming pools. We've got the pavilions, we've got the bridge. We don't have a swimming pool at the bridge. We've got Stenning and we've got Billingshurst. And I think they're all with places for people or people for places or whatever they're called. Have we had any inclination from that operator that these energy costs may affect their ability to pay their management fee to us, or their ability to continue with their opening hours as before the energy prices went up?
So we are in close discussion and dialogue with them. Obviously their energy prices have soared, especially since October. So they have been paying their management fee for the first quarter so far. So we're looking at them on a monthly and a quarterly basis. They paid the first quarter. We will be discussing with them ways in which they can mitigate some of those costs. So for example, when it is very, very cold outside, would it be sensible to heat the outdoor element of the pavilion's pool to let that heat escape straight into the air? And a common sense approach would suggest not, that actually we would perhaps not open that area when it is cold outside to try and mitigate that heat loss. So there will be ways in which we can deal with some of those energy increases. There are plans in place to try and put solar panels, for example, on the roof of the Broadbridge Heath Leisure Centre, the bridge, which will help reduce their energy costs as well. So we're working with them to try to enable them to keep as open as they can. At the moment, I don't think that's had an impact on the hours that they operate or the facilities. The temperature in the pool may be slightly cooler, they'll turn it down by 1 degree type approach. But at the moment, things are still being discussed about how they can continue to pay their bills should they continue to rise, and therefore how they can pay us the management fee. At the moment, though, they have been, but I suspect those conversations will get a little bit more pointed over the next few months as it turns colder.
Could I just ask a follow-up? Are you budgeting for, are you anticipating a reduction in the management fees for your year-end figures now?
Forecasting wise, no, we haven't at the moment, because they are continuing to, well, they have paid over the first quarter. Because it's a delicate position, we don't want to be saying to them openly, we're expecting them not to pay. So we are expecting them still to pay.
Forgive me, Chairman, you said they paid their first quarter. We've just been looking at the quarterly two figures, which takes us up to the end of September. So we're well into quarter three. Is their quarter two payment overdue?
So we have agreed to look very closely at all their figures that they are providing to us, so that we can go through them. And we haven't finished that process yet for the second quarter.
So the quarter two payment is overdue?
We have agreed with them that we will only invoice them after we have been through all their figures, so that we are looking very carefully and trying to work closely with them. Obviously, we don't want to be in a position where we don't have an operator of our leisure centres. And at the moment, they have paid what we have invoiced.
So we haven't invoiced them for quarter two?
Not yet, no.
No. Do they pay in advance or in arrears?
Normally, in pre-COVID times, they paid their management fee in advance. So we are trying to work flexibly with them because we know the pressures that they are under, and we don't want to push them over the edge. However, having said that, so far they have had sufficient money to pay the first quarter of the management fee.
So we haven't billed them for the June-September quarter nor the September-December quarter. Is that what you're saying?
No, and part of that is because they are a large organisation that can't instantly produce their numbers straight away. So we don't get them on the first day of the following month. A bit like our final accounts in a way, I suppose. It takes a number of days, sometimes weeks, to get the numbers. And then once they've provided those numbers, we have to review and go through them and analyse and go backwards and forwards with lots of questions. So it does take, unfortunately, a lot more elapsed time than we would like it to.
I understand they're a huge organisation and has very, many leisure centres around the place, and their accounting systems are obviously, perhaps from what you say, are perhaps not as efficient as we might have expected from a company of that size and nature. Could I then take you on to the same topic? The heating and lighting costs, obviously, of the capital will have been impacted by what's happening. Have we sought to reflect these increased costs in our charging? And if not, why not?
We will be setting our prices for the forthcoming year from the 1st of April as part of the budget setting process. So as yet, no, we haven't. That's not to say we couldn't go back mid-year, but at the moment, I understand the plan would be to reprice things from the 1st of April. There are other things that we are doing, of course, at the capital. So you might have seen in the capital programme the expenditure on the new lighting there, which is LED rather than old-fashioned halogen, which will vastly reduce the amount of energy that we spend on our lighting of stages, etc. That will help against that. And actually, that cost saving could be quite high now.
So what you're saying on the capital theatre, where HDC is having to bear those extra energy costs and heating costs until the end of March, is that right?
I'm not aware of any price review at the moment.
So we're bearing them. Thank you.
Yes. Councillor
Just
Lambert.
going back to the leisure centres for just a moment. Post-COVID, I understand that most of the income from the leisure centres was actually coming from swimming. Is that still the case?
So take-up of swimming has increased much more now than it was prior to COVID, but there are, of course, other areas where things have dropped off. So overall, the income that they are saying that they are getting is less than it was before. But swimming is a sort of a growth area, yes.
So if that goes, does that mean that they possibly won't be able to run the other areas of their leisure centres?
I don't know the detail of their structure sufficiently well to be able to comment on their operations. But of course, if you took the swimming pool out, you wouldn't have the heating costs of that swimming pool. So I don't know exactly where that tipping point is. But it's the sort of thing that we will be discussing with them, how they can go forward and operate, and other things that we can do and they can do to make sure that we can actually run a leisure centre.
Shall we move on to item 7, task and finish groups. At the last meeting of this committee, we agreed to set up a task and finish group to look at the council's use of consultants. We've asked for names for people to sit on that task and finish group, and I think we have, who do we have?
Philip and Paul and David are the names so far. We ideally want maybe a couple more, not necessarily from within the ranks of this committee.
Sorry, did you say task and finish on which consultants?
On the use of consultants.
Use of consultants, yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Anyone? I think we should try and move this on to so if after this meeting, if we can get a meeting of those volunteers convened and put out a note to other members that if they want to join, then now is the time to do it, and for those members to get together and set some terms of reference and get that moving. So I think, I assume we're going to be constrained by the fact that the council sort of ends at the end of April. So we really need to get that task and finish to gather any evidence it needs and make a report before then. Otherwise, it's just going to disappear into the long grass. Councillor Greening.
Sorry, Chairman, thank you. I know at the last meeting I said I'd look into leisure provision, and Councillor Jupp, with his comments and the discussion we're just having, is there anything that we could do further to move this forward? Because it does seem quite a sorry state of affairs that with our finances with the provider and having previously financed them after the pandemic, doesn't really seem appropriate moving forward. So I think this is something that we should be investigating as a committee, whether this contract we have is appropriate or the arrangement we have with Places Leisure is appropriate moving forward. I really think this is something we should be investigating.
So is that a proposal for another task and finish group? Okay. Sorry. Quite happy to see that set up. I think, as with the one that we've just talked about, there seems to be a bit of a lag between a proposal for setting up a task and finish group and actually getting moving. I'm quite happy if we can identify people to go on that task and finish group tonight to start, get the thing underway. But if we can't, then I would suggest that we're going to be waiting a month before.
I don't know if it's a task and finish group then, Chair, but we need to drive this forward because we are wasting thousands of pounds on these capital projects, as we just heard with the museum and the leisure centres. We need to be holding the Cabinet Member for Finance to account, because this isn't our money we're wasting, this is taxpayers' money that we're just literally throwing away. What are we doing? So I'd like the Cabinet Member for Finance to be at our next meeting. I know it's only 3 days before we discuss the budget, I think, but he really we should demand, or if he can't make that meeting, we could set up another meeting and ask him questions then, because, you know, Councillor Jupp and everybody actually has asked some very good points.
Well, we've already got him down to come to talk about the budget, but what you seem to be suggesting is that we have another agenda item to look at the
rather than a task and
legislature.
finish group, which will just slow things down,
Yeah.
we can just directly ask the Cabinet Member about some of these capital projects.
And it seems to me that we probably need to hold that in closed session, because there could be commercial confidentiality. Look into the Director of Resources on that.
I'd just like to clarify, are you asking here about the leisure contract or the capital programme?
I think they're both relevant to our discussions. It's a wider theme. It's a wider theme, but I would specifically like to talk about the leisure provision, because it's something which has been going on for a while, and Councillor Jupp's raised some excellent points on it.
Okay, we'll put it on the agenda for the next meeting as an additional item, and I will ask the officers to consider in the meantime whether we're going to need to have that as an exempt item or not. I mean, it depends on how sensitive they feel things are on that. Jack.
I wonder, would members agree it would be helpful to have had a briefing note available to members of this scrutiny committee in due time before we meet on the 23rd of January, so that they've had a chance to look at it and not just have a verbal report from the Cabinet Member. There are certain items, I suspect, if there's going to be information on the Places for People contract and the various terms, bearing in mind the COVID problems and now the rising energy prices, there are probably points on that have to be confidential, and so it should go into part 2. Thank you.
Can we arrange that? No?
We can.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you. I think it's unfair to only ask the Cabinet Member for Finance. If you're talking about the money side of things, that's fair. But I think you should have the other Cabinet Member come along to talk about the contract itself. Because I wouldn't expect Tony to have the detail of the contract. I would expect Roger to be, the Cabinet Member for leisure and whatever. So I think you need them both, Chairman, I would suggest, to talk about the different aspects.
Thank you for that point, Councillor Clark. I think you're right.
If we're going to look at that, should we not be looking at the contract that we have for Rookwood?
Rookwood's different, isn't it? I mean, the other contracts are all with Places for People. Places Leisure, sorry. I think we ought to look at Rookwood, but I think we might cloud the issue if we sort of start looking at both at one meeting. And I think Places Leisure is a much bigger contract, and possibly that might come first. Councillor Milne.
Thank you, Chair. Rookwood, just to point out, is in profit and has paid off their debts. So, whereas Places is an ongoing cost or subsidy, which we accept because we want the service. Just to say that I know from talking to Adam when he was there was heavy negotiations with Places during the COVID crisis. And we might want to look at what was already said, and that, there were very intense negotiations. There was a big issue whether they pull out altogether. There aren't so many other potential providers out there. Be careful what you dig up here, because you could, it's not like we've got 10 alternatives up here at all. We are, there is danger of losing the service, as well as, obviously we want to get value for money, but it's not. I would definitely ask to see details of what was negotiated, by Adam in that period over the last year or two.
Okay, so it sounds like we get a briefing paper before our next meeting, and that will be an agenda item for the meeting. Thank you.
Can I just ask?
Yes, sorry.
A briefing paper. Have you got a specific question on that? What is the question, and what is it exactly that you want briefing on? Or perhaps perhaps you could come up with that and send that in writing to us, so that we can do that. And the other thing I'd just like to pick up as well is that we talk about subsidising. They are currently, so far this financial year, they have paid their management fee, and that management fee is to us. So we are not subsidising them so far in anything as well.
They paid their management fee for the first quarter, but not for the second quarter and the third quarter. Is that right?
That's because we haven't invoiced them yet.
Because
So we may
council
well.
hasn't invoiced them. So the question is, if you're not invoicing them, that should be part of your briefing note to us, I'm sure. Because at the moment, there's been an executive decision not to charge people rent for their premises. Is that right?
I'll provide
I assume
that.
Leader approved.
I will provide information in a briefing note. It won't just be me, it'll be a number of my colleagues as well. And we'll cover as much as we can, but it would be helpful to be directive, wouldn't it?
Well, if I may suggest, a brief resume of the contract, the brief resume of what happened during COVID, and a brief resume of why we haven't invoiced this particular tenant for the June, September and December quarters.
Further to my answer that I gave earlier.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. Yes.
No, just clarify.
Councillor Fletcher.
I think it might be possible to make too much or be too emotive about this not having invoiced issue. Prior to COVID, my understanding is that there was a management fee that was paid routinely without trouble, and it was an arrangement according to the contract that they gave us a management fee. Whether or not they were making a profit or a loss was not relevant, because the management fee was part of the contract. Because of the extreme change due to COVID and the negotiations as to whether the service could continue, the arrangement was made, as I understood it, that there would be an open book review with Places Leisure to look at things on an ongoing and month by month basis. It's therefore entirely understandable in my view that would mean that we would be waiting until we'd seen what the outcome was before we invoiced, because things were very, very tight from everybody's point of view, and so the way to do it, rather than to invoice in advance for a sum of money that may never be forthcoming, it was decided to actually look at what the appropriate figure was and agree it, and then go ahead and invoice. Now, you might feel that's no longer appropriate, but I don't think the tone is useful there.
Would it be worthwhile just to remind ourselves, and obviously I listened to what Councillor Fletcher said. However, I think we had 269,000 people visited our leisure or sports centres in the Q2, which I assume produced some income for our operator. Would that be so? Would that be fair? Is that a fair assumption?
I believe they are charging people, so I would imagine that there is some income there, yes.
So they're charging 269,000 people who went but we're not charging them. Is that right?
Of course, what we need to know is how many people previously were there when the contract was set, what that sort of bar was for the number of people that would be visiting. And of course, if that was 400,000 people and they are now only getting 270,000 people, then obviously they're not doing as well as they did before when that contract was set. So those are the sorts of discussions that we're having with them, and we're in dialogue with them, we're talking to them, we're not letting them off any fees, that's for certain, until we understand their figures, their incomes, their expenditures in much more detail than a sort of a high level guesswork that we might be doing, without knowing that detail and data.
Would I be right in thinking when they paid the Q1 management charge, they were having about 260,000 people visiting that quarter? So the figures haven't changed very much, is that right?
No, but their costs might have done, mightn't they, with the energy prices rising.
Right, okay. So it's a one-way contract.
Well, hopefully the briefing paper will give us some information that we can make some judgments on, and hopefully the debate we have at the next meeting will clarify some of these issues. I suggest we move on to item 8, police performance. You remember at the last meeting, I proposed that we asked Councillor Utan to take this matter to the police and crime panel. And there was a counter proposal that we invited our MP Jeremy Quinn, who at that time was the policing member of the cabinet. I did write to him, but before I had a reply from him, we had yet another new government, and he had yet another different role, so it was inappropriate for him to come. So I'm proposing that we revert to my previous proposal, which is to ask Councillor Utan at the next meeting of the police and crime panel to raise our concerns. And I believe it was particularly about domestic burglary and knife crime, but I'm happy to be guided on that. But I think it would be good if we can get something to Councillor Utan before that meeting, so that we can ask the police for a response and an explanation of why their performance indicators only seem to be moving in one direction. So any comments or proposals, I'd be very grateful. Councillor Fletcher.
I think it's, as I've said before, I think it's really important that we include the issue of road crime in this examination of policing. It is a really serious matter. There are more people die from road deaths than are killed by homicides and so on. And it's the problem that alerted everybody, the problem that brought this to this committee was a lack of public confidence in getting a response when things were reported to the police. And that is particularly the case on roads policing matters. In sort of looking into this, I was looking at the possibility of more efficient reporting of third-party reporting of offences, because this is something that's been very successfully carried out by West Midlands Traffic Police. And Mark Hodson of West Midlands Traffic Police has said he'd be very willing to come and give a talk or a presentation on how they have succeeded in doing that locally there and what the benefits might be for us here. And so far the response I've had is that effectively there already are enough reports. Any more reports are too difficult to or too expensive to manage, and Operation Crackdown has been a victim of its own limited success. Now that's exactly the reason, in my view, why we should be looking at asking the police what they can do and what they can do in partnership with us to have more efficient reporting of third-party offences, more efficient processing of those offences, so that the system doesn't get overwhelmed and so that people aren't immediately or just don't give up because they report things and get no action. So I know that Councillor Utan is being suggested as the cabinet member to be dealing with this, but I'd like, and roads are not part of her brief in terms of housing, but maybe they are in terms of public protection. I would like this to see this extended to roads policing, and consideration being given to take up Mark Hodson of West Midlands Police, his offer to actually provide some assistance on this, presumably remotely by Zoom.
Can I just clarify? Scrutiny of the police and the police commissioner is a difficult one in that we can't directly scrutinise them, because the police and crime panel, which is a county-wide panel with a member for each district plus the 2 counties and the County Borough of Brighton, that is the committee that scrutinises the police commissioner. So Councillor Utan sits on that committee. Councillor Mitchell is the chairman of that committee. And what my proposal was to ask Councillor Utan to use her influence in that committee to highlight our concerns, so that at least our concerns are being fed through to the right quarter to actually scrutinise issues. I don't think, and Councillor Mitchell constantly telling me that we don't have any right to scrutinise the police at all, which is true, but however, we do have the right to ask our representative to represent us on that panel and to try and get some action. So that was my proposal. And I know that there's several members here that have made the point that they are not happy with the police and we really need to take some action. Councillor Serkis.
The trouble with the police panel when it comes to scrutinising the Police and Crime Commissioner is that the Police and Crime Commissioner has the perfect get out of jail free card, which is to say it's an operational matter, nothing to do with me. And that, I think, is what happens. So, I mean, the real problem is this. When I years ago, I found as a councillor that the police were active. And I remember if there were neighbour problems, antisocial behaviour, they would be round, they would deal with it, they would threaten to take action against people who were causing problems in the neighbourhood. Now what you have all too often is what we saw on the news this morning, of a woman and her child having dinner and somebody firing some sort of gun through the window, smashing the window, glass everywhere. She calls the police, and the police more or less said, well, what do you expect us to do about it? They didn't come. They refused to come. She said, well, don't you want to even come and see, look at the evidence? No, why would we want to come and look at the evidence? And we've seen those examples far too often, and they are reflected in the concerns that I get from, a local plumber who had a recording of somebody stealing equipment from his garage. And he got a very clear identification, spoke to the police, and the police gave him that sort of response. What do you expect us to do about it? The police seem to have become adept at finding reasons why they don't have to do anything. I mean, And as for the non-emergency number, where they love to shovel people onto the non-emergency number, well, you know, when I was the cabinet member for waste, we had the idea we'd tip a load of rubbish up in the Carfax and then talk to people about fly tipping. But we thought we'd better let the police know. Our officers spent 3/4 of an hour on the non-emergency line and got no response, and in the end didn't bother to tell the police. I mean, that's what we want to get across, I think, that the police seem to be abdicating their responsibility. The reputation of the police amongst the public is the lowest I can ever recall. And I think we need to get that across. There's a real crisis of policing, and we need to convey that. Personally, I think replacing watch committees with police and crime commissioners was a fundamental mistake, but that's a personal view. But we really need to, that's the point. Our residents are very unhappy. Their confidence in the police service is the lowest it has ever been, certainly in my recollection. We need to convey that whenever and wherever we can to the police service.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Serkis. Councillor Fletcher.
I'd like to support a lot of what Councillor Serkis is saying there. And I think the reason it may or may not be the case that we can scrutinise or have a right to scrutinise the police, but we have a very strong interest in this. The police are our partners. They are asking us to tell our residents to report a crime to them, so that crime and antisocial behaviour, so that they can act. If we do that and it doesn't work, that reflects extremely badly on us as a council. And there are very many areas where the work of the police and the work of our neighbourhood wardens, for example, overlap, and there's a partnership there. So I think we have a very strong interest and a duty to make these representations to the police. And I'd just say again that as far as I'm concerned, I believe that it's really important that roads policing is included in that.
Thank you. Just an observation I was going to make is that I noted recently that the Chief Constable of Hampshire made a statement that all burglaries would be attended. Now, I think this is a direct result of pressure coming from his police and crime commissioner. So then they're not totally useless. I take the point about watch committees that were probably more effective, but it's trying to find the levers to use to try and influence the situation we're faced with, and that is my proposal, that we ask Councillor Houghton to take this forward on our behalf. I hope that we can make this point here and at council, possibly at cabinet, and I hope that when Councillor Houghton comes back with a report from her panel, that again that is brought up and is debated. Councillor.
I think it's a very good idea. I mean, my suggestion would be that we keep up our sleeve the ability that if we can't scrutinise the police directly, we can certainly scrutinise that committee. And if the chairman happens to be one of our councillors, well, hard luck to him. And just scrutinise his role and question what he's doing.
Seems like a good idea. Thank you. Councillor Skip.
Yeah, just to say that, of course, we're told that we are in one of the safest parts of the country. So whatever we say, we're met with that statement, and it was made a month or so ago, I think, by at one of the meetings I was at by one of the officers, and I think that's probably absolutely right. The basic problem is, of course, that they haven't got enough money and they haven't got enough policemen, and you can't stretch an elastic band before it snaps. And I think that's their problem, and unless they have got a really creative way of dealing with a lot of the crime issues that we have, it's going to continue. I'm afraid it's a tired society, isn't it?
Councillor Clark.
For what it's worth, the question that went through my mind is, can we increase the powers that we give to our wardens? We have the wardens, they're not there to replace the police, but at least it could give the confidence to the public. In my village, the wardens are absolutely valued enormously for what they do. And if we give them a bit more muscle, that might help. I don't know, it's just a thought.
Which cabinet member looks after our ward? Could put that point to her as well, certainly. Councillor Milne.
Thank you. I think a lot of people really value the wardens, as indeed do I. I think they've been fantastic. However, they may not want too many more powers because it would involve them in confrontations that they would really prefer not to have.
So are you happy that I write to Councillor Houghton on the basis of our debate and see where that takes us? At the last committee, we were asked to bring back the task and finish group that looked at the Section 106 contributions in 2017. And consider whether there's any outstanding concerns which may require a further task and finish group. I don't know if everyone's read that report and whether there are any observations to it, or whether you think that the conclusions from that group were correct and need no change. Councillor Milne.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it was looking at a completely different question to do with regarding really on Section 106 funds and how areas which didn't have any development, how we could compensate them with other funds. It was addressing a different set of issues. The issue that I think we should be addressing is Section 106. It's hugely important. It's hugely complicated legally. And very large sums of money are involved, and we have a local plan hopefully going through, and we'll be negotiating some more, a significant number more deals. What has happened is over time it's become apparent that the deals that we made a while ago had not worked out as we would have liked. I have no idea whether that's inherent in the Section 106 process, but anyway. So if you look at, say, Wickhurst Green, we've ended up not getting the school, not getting the community centre, which was promised, and because of the way it's written, we're in danger of losing the land or asset that was set aside for it. So, can we write our agreements in a way that takes account of things not turning out the way we want, like the Department of Education not doing what we want them to do, what we expect them to do. Secondly, if you take another very large site, north of Horsham, that has also been very problematic. The delivery of, for instance, of affordable housing has been extremely poor, well below our targets. I would also say that I've tried to personally scrutinise that agreement, and they basically, in particular, the viability assessment, which was reviewed after, because it was 5 years since it was drawn up. It was reviewed last year, and I was unable to get any access to the figures in any meaningful way. There was a publication, but it was so top line you couldn't have drawn any conclusions from it. And I tried very, very hard to get sight of the figures. I offered to go behind closed doors, etc., and I could not get it, despite the fact that the inspector said 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when it was first drawn up, that that the council had been too too secretive with its figures. So for all those reasons, I think what we have done in the past has not worked out the way we would like it to. I would like to explore whether we can look to write these agreements in a more effective way that deals with more all the things that events can throw up, so that we, over time, so that we don't lose out in the same way in the future as we have perhaps lost out in the past.
Councillor Clark.
Thanks. Well, I was on that task and finish group, so you're right, it didn't address those issues. All I can say is, on a personal front, there is nothing stopping you as a district councillor getting involved in the 106 agreements pertaining to your ward. I'm very heavily involved in any 106 agreement in Pulborough, Amberley and Cold Waltham. I see the drafts. I've got one on my desk at home. I go through the wording with the officers, and I make sure that what's delivered in that plan is more or less in line with what the village wants. I think the onus is on you as councillors to get involved. It's difficult, there is resistance, but it is possible. I acknowledge what you said about getting hold of the numbers. I can't comment on that, John, and I'm surprised that you couldn't get the data. I've heard that problem before. Cornicky's had that problem as well. But I don't think it's as black and white as you make out, is what I'm trying to say. And I certainly have personally access to 106s in the past and the ones that are being drafted now for the future. I think you could make a bid to be involved.
Bring Councillor Landrieu and then Councillor Mill.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just going to reiterate what Paul has said. I'm very much involved with 106 in our ward as well. And we have been able to change, because when it's set for specific things which the parish think they want, and then sometime later they realise that their priorities have changed. We've actually changed money from which was set out for a Muga, which we couldn't build anywhere, and now changed it for a skate park. So it's possible to get these things changed, but you've got to be looking at what's going in when a developer comes along. One of my big problems, and the thing Korniski had a problem with, was the county council, because money is obviously provided to them for highways and bits and pieces like that. We actually had an allocation for improvements to the Downs link, and then when we went to improve the Downs link, we were told by county that the money had been used elsewhere. It had been used on the Downs link, but not in our area. So that was we got that resolved in the end, but that was one of the big problems. I think they tend to it looks as though county see things in pots, like all the 106 money from wherever for highways goes into that pot. And if we need some money, we just draw it out of that pot, irrespective of whose money it is. And that was the big problem that we had. And I'd like to think that that's not happening anymore. Obviously, Horsham hold the money on behalf of West Sussex, but then when they want to draw it down, they just say what it's for, and we draw it down, irrespective of whose money it is.
I think with regard to Councillor Clark's comments, that I totally agree. Local members should be very involved with their applications. I represent Roffey North, which frankly doesn't have a whole lot of development because there's no space left to develop in. Also, these. So I'm talking more about the strategic sites, really, or the big sites, because there's so much at stake. They go on for a very long period of time that will cover more than one councillor's tenure by some distance. And the fact is that we have. It has turned out in those two large examples I've given that we have not got what we thought we were going to get at the start. And we're talking very large sums of money or significant things that have failed. I don't know why it is. I'm not casting any aspersions on anyone, and I think this is a problem that other local authorities have had. So I feel that we should be reviewing the way that we write we can confine it to strategic sites if you like. I don't mind that. Reviewing the way that the agreements are written to see are we getting the best out of them. If the legislation dictates what it dictates, so be it. But I feel that we should be looking at, because so much is at stake. There aren't many things of such a scale that we deal with as this.
I think like Councillor Milne, I disclosed my interest being a West Sussex County Councillor. If I could, and I currently hold the Cabinet post for learning and skills, which includes planning places for schools. If I could just refer to Councillor Milne's comment about Wickhurst Green at Broadwich Heath, which was a part of the S106 for that development. I hear over the years that perhaps it wasn't the most robust of documents in other issues as well as the provision of education. We won't go there now because that was done, I think, 10 years or more ago. But on the question of the school, or the primary school at Broadwich Heath, this of course would be a school provided by the central government. It'd be a free school. It wouldn't be one provided by the county council. And the Department of Education, who deals with these matters, took advice from West Sussex County Council with regard to demand for school places in Broadwich Heath. The existing or historic primary school there is called Shelley, and Shelley was expanded, I think, in about 2015. Councillor Milne, although he's not the ward member, may correct me on that one, but certainly around about that stage. And it's expanded because of the delays in building out Wickhurst Green and getting the new houses there. And for the last few years, the number of new pupils going into reception at Shelley is set at 60, 2 classes. It's known as a 2 form of entry school. We can't have more than 30 youngsters in a reception or year 1 class. And we have not exceeded the number of 60 preferred places, first choices for youngsters. So we have been able to accommodate all those people wanting to go as their first preference to Shelley. So per se, there was not the first preference demand for additional school places in Wickhurst Green. Now, on another point, so that's the background story. I don't know what's going to happen with the local plan for Horsham. I don't know what's going to happen with those developments which are sort of in the embryo stage for surrounding Wickhurst Green. The situation may change when those come along, if they ever do come along. But based upon current evidence, there wasn't the demand that the Department of Education felt was sufficient to proceed with a new free school. And the capital sum for this wasn't any 106 money coming to us. That money would come from central government for the build costs, which I think would probably be in the region of, let's say, £5 million, which is a considerable sum of money to build when you haven't got first place at demand for that school. Thank you.
Councillor Milne, then Councillor.
Thank you. It's precisely because we lack control overall. As you say, Department of Education made their decision and the County Council together. We lack control over that, and that's going to happen again. One of the main things that angers people is the way promises are made at development. When developments are approved, promises are made of community facilities that don't turn out in reality. I mean, you must have all have heard that on the doorstep a million times. And that happens because very often there is another party, a central government organisation, that is also involved in the decision, and we can't control it. Now, that we can't change. What we can change, potentially, is to write the agreements carefully enough that if that happens, we still get the asset, whether it was money or land or whatever it was, so that that can be redeployed for another community purpose. We don't lose it outright, as we are in danger of doing with Wickhurst Green and has happened around the country with many other local authorities. So that's what I'm asking for, to look at, to see whether we can improve the way in which these agreements are written. Because don't forget, we're up against developers who have KCs coming out of their ears. They've got they've got so many more resources than us. What is at stake is very, very great. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's important to distinguish between, as Councillor Milne said, like the big strategic sites compared to the smaller sites in our wards and stuff. I think the lesson still stands. It's up to councillors to get involved. I mean, thinking of a particular example at the moment, there's a project going on ahead where district, county and parish are all working together towards a common aim. We're spending county's money for them, but at least we're all working together to do that. I mean, spending the 106 money that county has is not a problem, I have found, if you have good arguments to do it. And they're quite willing, and our county officers are very helpful in that. I think you've got a point in the strategic settlements, and I think nothing should prevent a scrutiny of those agreements or being aware of those agreements before they are signed and inked in. There is a process that comes in normally, is that the 106 is sent usually by the developers, and then a negotiation starts between us, the council that is, officers, and the developers. And at that stage, yes, I would have thought the councillor should ask to be involved. The question is who and when, and I don't think it should be confined to cabinet members only. I think it should be wider audience than that. But I think you have a point, is what I'm trying to say.
Councillor Milne, did you want to take this further within scrutiny, or do you think there's another way of doing this?
I think we do need to look at the way in which the agreements are written, and task and finish group is certainly a way to do that. And reserve it or make it for the strategic sites rather than all sites. Because I think it's resting it's too much on if we rely on the local member, then these are very, very big things, very large sums of money that go over too long a period. So I think it's resting too much on local members. I also think that it is very technical and legal, and you need all the help you can get. You're putting too much on the shoulders of local members, I feel, or an isolated local member potentially. So I think we should be looking at that, and I would suggest a task and finish group if anyone else has a better format. I would suggestion. But
Councillor Jupp.
I think two things. May I just comment? Councillor Landeroux spoke about the way in which monies are held by Horsham District Council on S106 agreements, and then they're released. And of course, if West Sussex County Council Highways want to put any project forward for use of the S106 money, of course, they have to build a case for that and have it approved by the officers at Horsham. So if there's a problem, we've just heard about the Downs link, that was probably something that HDC officers may not have been aware of at the time when they released that money. So that's one point. Secondly, I think I agree with Councillor Milne. S106 agreements for 2,000 or 3,000 houses are a very complex legal document. I do not pretend to be an expert in that at all. I used to act for real estate developers, so I had experience of those things from the other side. We need to have officers need to be skilled in negotiating these matters, and I believe they do take outside advice. And when North Horsham was put forward, I can remember having a conversation with the then cabinet member for planning about the use of a well-known firm of solicitors, city solicitors. I can't remember their name now. Perhaps Councillor Serkis may remember, he was a cabinet member at the time. So we do have to seek outside advice, and it's very inappropriate, I think, just for the ward councillor to have any concern. It's like sort of me being asked to sort of cook, Christmas lunch. I would be absolutely hopeless at it. That's yes. You don't end up with a burnt offering, and that's what we do. So we do have to take in mind all the other experts, and it is up. And I agree that if you have big developments like North Horsham or whatever the case may be, which we may have in the future, there may be a reason to take it to scrutiny. But we do need to be briefed. And forgive me, it's very easy to have comments on the doorstep from people who perhaps don't appreciate all of the matters that are involved. And opinions can be easily formed and poorly formed quite often. So you have to be well advised.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher and Councillor Mill.
Thank you very much. Picking up on the point made by Councillor Landau of the difficulty when Section 106 agreements need to involve West Sussex County Council as a third party, and I think acknowledged by Councillor Jupp there in terms of whether or not HDC officers were adequately informed in an issue that he was talking about. I would like to also reinforce that point. So I think one example I have in mind is also related to the Downs link, where there was a sum of close to £100,000, so not as large as we're talking about in a strategic site, but not chicken feed either, where the officers were under the impression that the sum of money had been negotiated to build one section of the link, and the money was actually spent on completely different work that was fortuitously very beneficial to the developer, who happened to want to have some work done in that place anyway. So in my opinion, we as a community lost nearly £100,000 worth of money there. So before leaping into defining the terms of reference for this task and finish group as being for strategic sites only, perhaps it might be worth considering including the issue of dealing with the multiple parties and agencies involved, because the example I was talking about, it seems to me to have been down to the split responsibilities between the two tiers of council that were involved in it.
Councillor Clark.
That's precisely the point I was making, is cooperative working together. I have found working with county council officers and parish and district to be very good. But it's up to the either the ward member or to the local county councillor to make that work and to pull it all together. You're right, these are different pots, but it is possible for things to work together. It's all about communication. And communication is important in this case. So that it does work at times, but you're right, not at all times. But I believe very much it's down to the individuals to get stuck in and to try and make it happen.
I'm going to suggest that if Councillor Mill can produce a paper for a future meeting of this scrutiny mission, setting out what terms of reference he thinks a task and finish group could look at, then we can consider that and decide whether that's the appropriate way forward. I think it also might be worth talking to the planning officers to see whether they've got a view before we set up a task and finish group. Yes, Councillor Mill.
Yeah, I wholly agree with that. Absolutely, they would know. They would have very important input on the best terms of reference.
Sorry, item 10 on the agenda is scrutiny training. We've sort of gone around the houses a bit on this. As always, the problem is finding a date, and I think December the 5th is a date that hasn't got anything in the diary at the moment, and our trainers can make. So I'm proposing that we have that as our training date, and that will be by Zoom in the evening, and you will be circular. Councillor Greening.
Chairman, being careful with my words, our Conservative group may have a meeting that evening.
You may have to absent yourself from that meeting.
I may not be able to, depending on what is on the agenda, but I may suggest that the 5th of December might not be appropriate. Unfortunately, I'm sorry.
Oh, that wasn't. Sorry, can I just ask Ian if he's got any clarification?
Sorry, can I just check, because I had a note to suggest that the 12th of December, which was another possibility.
That's why I say may, because
So it might be one or the other.
Yes, it may be the 5th, it may be the 12th. That's.
Do we have any idea when that might? Just in terms of getting it in the diary.
I think it's
More likely to be the 5th.
Have you seen Roger's email today? Anyway, this is, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
It may be the 5th, it may be the 12th, but perhaps another date, just to be on the safe side, perhaps.
If I may continue, there were a couple of other dates that we had to dismiss really, because one was the full council and one was the cabinet, which will be looking at a local plan, which I imagine one or two people at least may have to be involved with. 19th of December, there's no committee clash. I mean, if you're happy to meet that close to the festive season, can't guarantee mince pies, but 19th. Right, okay. Tuesday the 20th, there's a planning south in the afternoon, but so some of you might well be here for that anyway. So is that an option? Sorry, Tuesday the 20th of December. Yeah, the proposal is it's going to be 6:30 to 7 o'clock for a couple of hours, and it will be by Zoom. Yeah, so it's not, you don't have to be physically in a room. Sure you can.
Councillor Fletcher.
I'm just a little concerned that this is sliding really close to Christmas, and at this stage of the year, everyone's always optimistic about how much time they'll have in the run-up to Christmas, but either we or the trainer may find they don't have that time that close to Christmas, and I'm really wondering for how long we should, or how many dates we should be leaving aside, because the Conservative group might happen to want to have a group meeting then for an undetermined period of time. And actually, given that the 5th or the 12th were the preferred dates, and the Conservative group is not planning to have two group meetings, I would just like to question whether it might be better to try to stick to plan A or plan B, rather than go all the way to the 20th.
Do we have any idea when the 5th, 12th?
Councillor Fletcher is absolutely right. It's either going to be the 5th or the 12th. So can we do our training on the opposite date to that?
Yes, if we can firm that up fairly quickly, because
Probably just read what Councillor Noel said today. And that's it for the public forum.
okay. we'll try and resolve. It's either going to be the 5th or the 12th by the sound of it, and we will try and get that resolved ASAP so that we can get that in the diary, because I take the point that we really don't want this going right hard up to Christmas, and if it goes beyond Christmas, there's hardly much point in having it. We're almost be at the end of the council's year, so let's try for that. Okay, agenda item 11 is the scrutiny work programme. Is there any comment on that? No? Sorry?
Obviously, don't have to be updated.
Yeah. I mean, apart from the things that we've discussed today, I personally would rather we didn't have anything else on that work programme, not for my own personal feelings, but we are in the middle of the budget season. Then we are also in the local plan discussion, which is going to be long and heavy and go on for a very long time. And I think it's unreasonable to expect people to focus on too many things at once. And both the budget and the local plan kind of trump scrutiny to an extent. So if we can move on to item 12, which is the council forward work plan. Are there any things that anyone wants to bring up on that?
Can I just ask, you've got budget and medium-term financial strategy update, which is on the 24th, 3 days' time, for Cabinet and Council. Then we have again budget and medium-term financial plan back in January. That is just confirming. Are we going to be talking about budget medium-term financial plan for the 26th of January? 3 days.
We are, yes.
Chair, just a comment, please. Would we not expect to see the local plan on the forward plan? I don't know. That's a question.
So this is the version of the 1st of November. So I think it's been added subsequently to that. But we should have probably updated it and put that one on there. So apologies if that's the case.
Okay. So the local plan will appear on the forward plan for the council, or already does.
It's probably on the live version, but this is a copy. So.
Thank you. Any other points on the forward plan? There's no urgent items to discuss at this meeting, so I'm looking to try and close this meeting at 7:30.
You want some of us to stay to talk about time. You said earlier that we were going to try and be a date for the task finish.
can I suggest that committee services circulate on that?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. Yeah, sooner rather than later.
Sure. So we'll canvass the dates then for the initial meeting.
Okay. So that's the meeting closed. Thank you. Thank you for your attendance.